Welcome everyone to our new podcast, The Settlers, a podcast showcasing the pioneers of the gaming industry. I have my good friend Alex with me. Alex, how are you, buddy?
Doing well. How you doing?
Very, very good. I'm super excited about this one. I have also my friend Rodrigo, the founder of Moonray. What's up, Rodrigo?
How you guys doing? Glad to be here.
Very, very good. We created this podcast because I think in gaming, there's a lot of incredible builders. Rodrigo is probably top of my list in terms of people who are almost living in the future. I like thinking about builders who are essentially living in the future and trying to take us all with them. Rod, maybe for the audience, we start off with a bit of background on Moonray, what the game is, what you guys are trying to build.
Yeah, no problem. So we have been building Moonray. I mean, the project really started like 3 years ago as something totally different. I wanted to build a gaming studio and just do something, just make a new kind of game, make something that was new and interesting. Started building up a small team. 2 years ago, things really started getting a little bit more intense. Started putting the team together. And then last summer, when we saw what was happening in blockchain, it just became really, really clear that it was going to change the business model of gaming. At least that's what I thought. So we pivoted to the blockchain like last June. So it was June 2021. Basically started redesigning the game from the ground up. Initially we were going to make a single player game and then add co-op. Then we decided that, we've got to go multiplayer from the beginning. We've got to make a PvP game. And make quests and raids and things like that. So we have been basically rewriting the code since late summer for PvP, and we're getting ready to release the alpha hopefully this month in a few more weeks. But basically what we're building is we're working in Unreal Engine, and right now we're building on Ethereum mainnet, and we're making basically a PvP game. Right now it's 2 versus 2, 4 versus 4, and we're testing battle royale. Like we're going to start with 50-man battle royale. And the idea is to build a world that is big enough and broad enough that we can eventually scale it into different types of game modes. Where for us, the really important thing is to first get gameplay and get combat gameplay nailed. And that's where PvP comes in. I think it's the hardest thing to balance for, the hardest thing to develop. But it also lets you figure out the multiplayer code, figure out the servers, and just make sure that you have fun gameplay. But once you have that, you have a really solid base. And if 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2 is fun, then it's a lot easier to make an environment where you have 100 people running around on a giant open world map, and that's fun. So that's where we can take things in 2 or 3 years. But right now we're just very focused on having first small scale combat, have it be really fun and engaging. I like playing games like Devil May Cry, Godfall, Elden Ring, Assassin's Creed is awesome. So I really like that kind of third person action kind of game. I also played, a ton of Street Fighter and things like that. So we're really doing, we want thoughtful combat. We don't just want a button masher. And we want that melee combat where you have to think, you have to, be judicious in your use of special moves and blocking and dodging and their stamina and things like that. But it's still fun enough that a casual gamer can pick it up and within 5 minutes understand the core mechanics and just play and have fun. But it's got to have that extra level of like really deep gameplay that if you really want to get into it, you want to learn all the perfect timing windows of how attacks work, you can get into that and then you can really take it to the next level. So that's what we're building. I think that for the next year and a half, maybe 2 years, we'll be just entirely focused on PvP and exploring different types of PvP game modes. And then from there, we'll look at things that are more like, co-op quests or raids or things like that, a little more like traditional MMO style gameplay. Is something that we want we want to be able to scale into that if we see that the community likes it, or we may just stick with, different versions of really large scale combat and really huge environments. That's kind of like I'd say it's MMO-ish, but it's much more focused on combat mechanics, essentially. So it's basically it in a nutshell.
That's awesome. I'd love to dive into the gameplay loop a bit more deeply soon, but just kind of going back to the founding story as well, in terms of the team, who are the other team of co-founders, and when you guys started this project, was it all built in-house, or are you guys also getting some of the development done externally as well?
Yeah, no. So the team, we had, let's say in, end of summer, like 10 people, and now we're at 50. The co-founders are my brother and Hans, who's an old friend of ours. We do pretty much everything in-house. The only thing that we do externally is we work with a concept art studio that helps us with some environmental concepts. Every once in a while, we might get help on technical, like basically taking high poly models and turning them to low poly game assets. It's a very technical thing, and sometimes you can take to like outsource studios. And we also work with like a very specialized multiplayer engineering firm that does multiplayer optimization, and they build servers and things like that to help us get the server architecture nailed. But pretty much everything we do is in-house. It's just kind of like a question of management and control. Like working with like a lot of outsourced developers, very difficult to manage after a while. And we just prefer to find good people and hire, and we mostly hire on word of mouth. So mainly it's developers just bring their friends. Basically, it's how we've expanded.
That's awesome. And I would imagine even for you guys, do you come from a background of running game studios in the past? And how did you kind of transition into the stage where building a 50-person team is obviously a big team now, there's a lot of responsibility there. How has that journey been in terms of building up that team from scratch?
No, I mean, we're really business guys, fundamentally. I mean, my background is math, computer science, and I've been involved in gaming. I mean, I've been just a gamer my whole life. And then I started this as a pure gaming project 3 years ago. But really, we approach this as, we see a new opening in the market. We see that the incumbents, like the traditional game studios, are not going after it, and they've left a gap. And then that's where guys like us can come in. The traditional game industry has a very negative view of blockchain in general. They think that NFTs are a scam, that they're bad for the environment. There's all sorts of issues that mainstream gamers and the mainstream press has, and that filters into mainstream game developers. So there's very few of the large gaming companies that we think understand what's happening in blockchain. We think some of the executives get it, but they're not able to do what they would do in normal circumstances, which is, go after a new market opportunity. But it's pretty typical whenever there's a transformation, there's like a revolutionary shift in technology. Incumbents very rarely are able to adapt because they have a business model that they have to protect. They don't want to cannibalize it. The game industry is booming right now, the traditional game industry. So their basic attitude is, why would we do anything different? We're making record profits. This is like, boom years for gaming. And I guess that's true up to a point, but this is something that I do think is going to change the business model of gaming at a very fundamental level. I think it's going to take a little while to roll out and for the technologies like blockchain technologies to mature. But it is going to happen, I think, faster than the traditional game industry thinks it'll happen.
What do you think happens when traditional gaming studios actually start implementing NFTs? Because I think across the board, as Web3 increases in adoption, NFTs increase in adoption, it almost is not in their interest to actually not be part of the future. And so what happens in that scenario for, as you mentioned, a fast-moving gaming project when these game studios have thousands of people and billions in working capital? How does that work for you guys? How do you view the market then?
It depends on how fast they move. I mean, if you look at some really big traditional games, it's sort of like if their market is, let's say a bunch of teenagers right now, do they want those teenagers going to their mom and saying, hey, I want to buy an NFT? What is the mom going to say? Right? That's kind of what's going through their head. They've got shareholders. Some of them are publicly traded companies. And right now there's just a lot of risk in general with NFTs. So I do think that the traditional companies are going to move way too slowly. Blockchain moves incredibly fast. And I think they're going to move slow. But some of them will start doing it. They will start releasing NFTs, and releasing NFTs is great, but that's sort of like level 1 of blockchain. I mean, you don't really need, if all you're going to do is NFTs, you don't really need blockchain technology to do that. You can just make a traditional client server marketplace yourself and just, and the blockchain is great. I mean, it's better, but it's not really necessary. I think the real power comes when companies figure out how to integrate a token and NFTs into gameplay. And that's something that's much more difficult to do. No one's really figured it out yet. And there, the regulatory challenges are enormous. And that's what I think is really going to stop, traditional companies. Like, pick a traditional game company. Which one of those do you think is going to release a token? I'm saying
no way. No way. Yeah, no way. And so on the capitalization perspective, how has Moonray been funded so far? You mentioned it was a 3-year project. We know that, games take millions of dollars to build and quite a long time.
Yeah, they take forever. Yeah, so I mean, you know, I mean, look, we've been at it for 3 years, but essentially we started over. I mean, so we just took the core ideas that we had and we started over. You know, so in a way, we're brand new in that sense, even though we've got a bit of a history. I funded everything initially myself, but starting in the fall, we raised money in venture capital, basically. So it's all venture capital funded. Although now we are starting to, this summer, we're going to start selling, you know, we're going to do our Genesis drop, which are going to be NFT like characters and NFT weapons and things like that. So we'll start getting NFT revenue will be one of the sources of funding in the future.
And even just from a more macro perspective, it's quite interesting in a sense of, do you see like valuations in, you know, crypto and NFT gaming are multiples of what it is in more traditional gaming comparables? Just because I would imagine from a revenue perspective for you guys, early on being compounded by NFT sales, there's a real premium there at the moment that's in the market. Like, how do you see that compared with traditional gaming companies that maybe are at similar stages at the moment?
I mean, the thing is that the economic potential of a blockchain game is much, much higher than a traditional game, you know, because I mean, that's really where the power of NFTs and tokens come into play. And especially if you can unlock that secondary market where people are now trading. When people own their own assets, they spend more. And we've seen that. And other projects have seen that as well, you know. So there's something about ownership that, you know, it's kind of like, you know, if you're renting a house, you don't fix it up. But if you buy the house, you know, you fix it up. When you own something, you put a lot more effort into it. And the same thing goes for digital assets. So that's where we think things will change the economics of the industry, because when games mature, you know, blockchain games, and they show gamers that this is your asset, you own it, you can trade it here, you can trade it there. That changes the psychology of gamers. You know, you can buy a skin, play with it for a few months. It doesn't have to appreciate. It's not about it doubling or tripling in value necessarily. Just buying something and then selling it for 80% of what you bought it for 6 months ago. That's a huge change compared to the industry right now. You know, you can play with something and maybe not lose value, maybe you just break even, but you got to use it for a while for free. Or maybe it does go up in value. I mean, who knows? You know, that's going to change the psychology of gamers. And I think you're going to see blockchain games taking a lot more revenue than traditional games, in part for that reason.
Yeah, it's really interesting in the sense of people forget, like in traditional gaming, you're paying $60 or so, and that's money that you'll never get back. Obviously, you're doing it for entertainment, but do you potentially think that we've almost been spoiled by the whole narrative of play to earn, and that the whole point of these games is that we can now start creating enormous economic opportunities out of it? But obviously, the recent months have shown that there are a lot of issues with that type of model, and actually just you can essentially play for free by getting ownership of these assets, right? And that's something that it seems like in the current market, a lot of people have forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, we look at it a little bit differently than most of the other games that we see out there. I mean, most of the games to me look like DeFi projects, is what we always say. These are DeFi projects with a game interface. And I don't think that's fun. I don't think that's fun to play. And I don't think it's actually true entertainment. It's sort of like the reason that you go to a casino, because it's just fun to hang out and you know, play cards and drink. Imagine if it was not fun to go to a casino, and on top of it, it costs you money. I mean, like, then no one would do it. But that's a little bit of some of the games now. It's like they're not really that fun, but you can, you know, earn tokens. But none of that is sustainable. You know, there's got to be money coming in order for there to be payouts. Games that rely on their treasury, you know, and that don't really have a good plan for scaling to a certain number of users, where they have recurring revenue from incoming, you know, revenue streams that can pay out rewards. That's actually much more difficult to do than maybe has been appreciated so far in the blockchain industry. So I do think there's going to be a big shift in the basic business model of blockchain games, and it's going to move away from the, you know, staking, you know, passive staking rewards, or, you know, games that just pump out tokens and pay rewards out of treasury. That's, I think, mostly going to disappear.
And I think that's a really good segue into talking about fun and gameplay loops. I'd love to dig a little bit deeper in terms of the gameplay loops of Moonray. Obviously, you guys are marketed as an action RPG. I guess just to help our listeners really start to draw comparisons as well, do you think that there are any Web2 games at the moment that really reflect the type of gameplay loop that you want to be achieving with Moonray?
Yeah, you know, like if you've played, you know, Devil May Cry is always a good example, but it's a very linear single player game. Naraka Blade Point is a multiplayer game that I think is probably closest to our style of combat. You know, but imagine it's, you know, melee combat. We're really focusing right now on 2 versus 2 and 4 versus 4 and optimizing around that just to make sure that that's fun. So having different weapon classes and making sure that that small scale combat is fun. But really it's our combat is about, getting in, attacking, dodging, but you can't just mash buttons or else, it's like, there's stamina. So you're going to, essentially, run out of stamina. So you've got to have some level of tactics, essentially. But yeah, those, Godfall's an awesome game. If you guys have played that, I mean, the game is, really fun. It's on PlayStation 5, it's again, really just solid combat. I don't know, just a little violence, is always fun. Swords and shields and stuff like that. That's kind of what we like.
How do you think about taking this? We talk all the time about Web3 gaming, take it to the mainstream, onboard more people into blockchain. Where does Moonray fit in all this? Like, how do you plan on capturing the imagination of a traditional gamer? Because we talk about so much of this is, we talk about DeFi in the last 18 months, but looking forward, how do we get more traditional gamers in here? Like, how do we capture their imagination?
Yeah, I mean, we think that the blockchain should become invisible and that gamers don't care about blockchain just because it's blockchain. I mean, it's just a technology that enables certain types of economic transactions. What's interesting are the economic transactions. And blockchain is just a way of doing that securely and letting gamers take their assets anywhere they want. But we want to make the blockchain invisible. And just let the gamer know what they get from having the assets that are backed by a blockchain, essentially. But we look at it as like a TCP/IP. It's just, no one really knows what that is because you don't need to know, because websites just work and who cares, right? And that's the way the blockchain is going to be at some point. There may be some subtle differences. Maybe it matters if these assets are on Ethereum or Solana or whichever chain. I mean, some people may care about that, but even that I think is going to be very, very few. I think most gamers just want to know they can trade their assets basically, and then knowing that they can take it to different marketplaces is all they're really going to care about. And as we, as the blockchain infrastructure matures and becomes a little bit more seamless, and easier to, to create wallets, interact with marketplaces and things like that, that's when I think we'll start to see the mainstream really start to pay attention. But a lot of it is we got to stop, talking about blockchain, especially we got to stop, talking about staking and things like that. It's just like, I mean, who cares about that? I mean, no gamer cares about that.
What's your read on tokens then? Twitter loves talking about most of these games probably don't need tokens. You can just probably fund the game off of NFT sales. How do you guys view?
I mean, it depends on how you use the token. I mean, a token can be really powerful if you use it right. I mean, that's what we're trying to design right now. I mean, a token has a lot of uses, and it can power an economy. It can be the medium of exchange. You can use it in ways to reward your core community. But the thing is that not every gamer needs to care about a token. So we just look at it as different segments of gamers. There's gamers that might care about NFTs, gamers that might care about tokens, but not every gamer will be in one of those buckets. And you have to make a game that's fun to play without a token, and it's fun to play even without NFTs. And then for the gamers that do care about those things, then it's almost like it's like an extra level of enhancement, essentially. It's kind of like back in the day, like people would play World of Warcraft and they just would set up a little shop, and I always thought that was so weird. It's like, why aren't you going out and like going on a quest and, just beating someone up? And like, some people like that, right? So it's like, there are people who, for them, the economic side of things is fun. Well, then you can create a game that has that, and has that built in. And then blockchain technology is fantastic for that. But it doesn't have to be every type of gamer. So the way we think about it is like, you don't have to force every aspect of blockchain onto everyone. It's like you put it there as a menu of items for people to pick and choose, and gamers will segregate themselves into the type of gameplay that they find, enjoyable.
Would you be able to take me through the revenue drivers of Moonray at the moment? Obviously, you guys have recently done an NFT drop, and I imagine that's a big portion of revenue. Are there other streams in terms of marketplace transactions or even other layers that you guys are building up at the moment?
Eventually, marketplace transactions will be part of it, but initially it's going to be mostly NFT revenue and secondary trading. But then there will be, think of like, I guess like, different things that you can do with NFTs where you will have to you do it in our marketplace, and then we basically take little fees of things. So, over the long term, we become more and more of a platform that enables, a peer-to-peer economy. And it's not so much us as a company selling to gamers, but, gamers interacting with each other. And we just provide the infrastructure for them to do that. That's ultimately, I think, where the real power of blockchain technology is going to lie, in that you can enable that just a lot more easily and with a lot more trust if you use blockchain. And I think that a lot of this comes down to like trust and community. And when gamers understand that these assets that they're buying, they can take it anywhere, they really own it, that's when you're going to really unlock kind of like the next wave of economic potential. And then from that standpoint, all we want to do is just be the platform or the marketplace that enables that.
Yeah, and I would also imagine that just from a pure volume of revenue perspective, NFTs are really kind of kickstarting the initial capital that you guys have, but it looks like a lot of the more mature blockchain games at the moment, I mean, getting transactions off the marketplace becomes the big revenue driver. And is that the types of projections that you guys have internally as well for Moonray?
Yeah, no, we're definitely very much, I'd say for the next 2 years, like really, really focus on NFTs. Like basically an NFT game, essentially. I mean, honestly, for a lot of games, if you just do that right, it's like Fortnite on steroids, if you can pull it off.
I mean, the actual economies of, just imagine CSGO, like the amount of money that's just on skins, and those, you can't even withdraw that money. It's fake. That's fake internet money right there.
Yeah.
And then even looking at World of Warcraft, RuneScape, I mean, I think just across the board, they've been a lot of sources of inspirations for great economies. What do you think the future of Web3 gaming looks like, by the way? We think about things like, do you think it's the metaverse theory of we go in and spend all of our times in a social stance, like meeting rooms? Like I suppose I'd categorize that as like the meta view of the world. You have your Oculus, you go sit in meeting rooms with your boss, or is it more of a social fun experience?
I mean, I think maybe the metaverse stuff becomes real when the technology gets much, much, much better. But right now, like VR is really cool. It's very immersive, but I don't think it's anywhere near what it would have to be for us to just like want to hang out in a VR environment for a long period of time. When that happens though, then that's a different ballgame. But I think for now, gameplay has to be at the center of everything. So I don't understand, and maybe this is just me, the value proposition of a metaverse that doesn't have gameplay, because it's like, okay, I'm joining the metaverse and now what? It's like, I can run around. Okay, cool. But, I mean, maybe it's just because, I really like combat, but it's like, unless there's like some fun gameplay, like core gameplay loop, I don't really see the point of it. So I think that's where I think metaverses are going to have to grow out of some sort of core gameplay mechanic. And then the metaverse is like another, I mean, then a social hub does start to make a lot of sense. You can think of a lot of metaverses as like a giant, matchmaking lobby almost, or just a giant social hangout, but then you have something to go and do. And it's not like, oh, come check out my virtual apartment, it's like, yeah, no thanks, but I will jump into like a 50-man battle royale map with you and go have fun. I mean, that I could see happening. So I that's my personal, I mean, but I'm biased. I'm definitely biased, but I think it's going to be mostly, I think the metaverses that work for the next like 5-10 years are going to be based around games.
Yeah. And even on the metaverse thesis, I think a lot of metaverses at the moment are almost trying to build composable layers, like essentially allow players to come in and for them to sort of impose their own UGC off the top of that foundational layer. In terms of that metaverse theory, is that something that you guys have in the back of your mind as well? And there are deliberate development decisions being made. So like, if there was the opportunity to move more into that direction, you have the optionality to do so.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, Roblox and Minecraft, I mean, there are ways of doing things where people are just building they enjoy, and those are like huge games. So I think it's doable. But there is like a core loop there of something that's fun that people find really fun, right? So I mean, I think that's possible for us. We do think the metaverse is going to be important, but we see it as supporting the gameplay that we're building. So like the metaverse isn't, it's for us, the metaverse is a social and economic hub, and it's essentially like an opportunity to build large open environments that enable different types of gameplay. But everything is focused around creating different types of gameplay or creating worlds that players can explore, and maybe the difference between running around in an open world setting and running around in like a battle arena is that you get like dynamic gameplay that you weren't anticipating, because you're exploring the world and 20 other dudes show up and then you have a little battle there. Okay, that's cool, and that's something you can't like program in, and that becomes really fun. But that's to us like what a metaverse should be about. It's like a place for other things to occur. We don't, but it's just the kind of game that we're making, I guess. I mean, like, we're not really focused on like, you can buy land and customize it. We are going to have land, we are going to have buildings and things like that, but everything supports combat gameplay mechanics in the end.
Yeah, and I think even if you look at, I mean, the game that is most representative of this at the moment is Elden Ring, right? You have a huge world that someone can just come in and really explore and immerse themselves into. Really, it's a form of escapism, right? And that seems like that's the ambition that you guys have as well, which is, let's start with a tighter gameplay loop, because obviously creating an Elden Ring takes years and years and years of development. So would you say it's correct that your strategy is essentially, let's find a smaller scale of, let's have a fun gameplay loop in terms of a PvP within an arena, and then the ambition moving forward is very much, how do we create the Elden Rings? Because that, you would imagine, has much more infinite gameplay, and it allows someone to have endless fun in that world, right?
But if you look at Elden Ring, I mean, it's essentially what they did. First, they figured out combat gameplay, and they spent years figuring that out. And once they had really solid combat gameplay, then they made a big world, right? And that's kind of like what we're doing too. We think it's going to take us a couple of years to figure out this is the real gameplay. This is what we're based on, and then from there, maybe we scale it into something bigger. But I do agree that escapism is really important. And it's also really, really cool to be able to build a world. I mean, the reason, initially that is what I wanted to make, is a single player open world game, because I just really like those kind of games. I like being able to create a huge environment. You go out and explore and you have fun, and then you do something new. So the way that we are approaching this is that we think that there's basically 3 core pillars that you have to establish first. The first is gameplay. So you got to have your core combat mechanic just nailed, and it's got to be polished and super fun. You have to have the community. And that's what hopefully the gameplay is helping you build. You got a community that likes the game, that likes the gameplay, they're having fun. And then you have the lore, like the world, the story that you're building. And once you have those 3 components in place, and that takes years to develop, then the possibility of creating really large, open environments that can be more of like what I think a real metaverse should be. Because, the metaverse, once you start getting into that level of scale, it goes back to the idea of different types of gamers like different types of things. I mean, there's a lot of gamers that don't necessarily want to just go in and do combat, but they will go out to like a little village and get some buildings and set up, some sort of little economic shop or something like that provides services to the other gamers, and that's something that you can do. I mean, you can do it with traditional technology, but blockchain is much, much better for that. But then you start to get different types of gamers coming into this huge world, and you start getting dynamic gameplay that you can't really anticipate, and that's where things start to get, really fun. But you first have to have you have the gameplay, the community, and you've got to have the story, so the way that we're approaching it is, we are, obviously gameplay right now, we're super focused on that. The community is coming along, and we're putting out a comic book. So we're going to be putting out a comic book every month, every 4 or 6 weeks or so, which basically tells the story of, just the world we're building. Because we just want to make like a new type of sci-fi, just something surreal, really far future, really weird, just because we think it's fun and no one else is doing it. But what we're thinking is, eventually, when we have enough of that world, sketched out on paper, and we're showing what the gameplay could be like, it's like, hey, should we keep going and start building these huge environments and explore this world? And we think that the community will say yes.
Storytelling aspect is really fascinating, because you look at single player games, and of course there's interesting gameplay loops there, but also one of the key drivers that get people going, and for a lot of the top games, is actually having a story that people can follow along, and that's the thing that keeps them engaged. And you could argue that maybe for multiplayer games that is not as prominent, because the focus is more on that dynamic gameplay. But for you guys, how do you think about balancing the two and actually having a really rich lore and really rich story, as well as having really strong gameplay loops? Because it seems like that's something that is top of mind for you guys as you're investing into the lore and you're investing into the different comic sets.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the story is super important, because there does have to be something there that's interesting to make the player want to spend time in the world, and so I think that a lot of that comes from just like, what is this world? Why is it there? Who are the people in the world? That's why franchises like the big sci-fi franchises do so well, because people are, they like to spend time in those worlds. So I do think that you have to create that to some degree, but I think that storytelling can be, you can do, even in a multiplayer setting, you can do, quests that are meant to be done alone or maybe with one other person, and they're relatively linear. But I also think you can design stories that are meant to be played a little bit more dynamically. So you can have like co-op quests where other groups of people may also be involved in the story to a degree, and you can have dynamic gameplay that takes part. So in other words, you can have a series of challenges that you have to go to, go here, go there, and beat this boss. That doesn't mean that there aren't other groups of people that maybe are trying to stop you. But I think that when you can combine storytelling elements so that there is like an overall idea of like, go to this temple and, conquer the temple. But you're not just fighting against AI, you are fighting against, some of it's AI, some of it's other like other gamers that might just be coming in randomly, or maybe they're the story that they're on is stopping you. Then I think things start to get, really interesting, because I think, if you look at the games that people spend the most time in, it's always multiplayer, because always human interaction becomes the most fun after a while. Single player stories are great, but once you play through it, like, I guess you can play through it again, and some people do, but there's a limit. At least for me. But anything that's multiplayer, you can just go in again and again and again, because it's always going to be a little different. So I do think you can combine elements of both and have interesting gameplay that's dynamic, that's multiplayer, but still very much story driven. And I think if it's not story driven, or if the story is weak, or if there's no point, then I think that you're in trouble. And that's why we're trying to create something, like a world that's just a lot more, that we think is going to be more interesting. And we're staying away from near future. We're staying away from the themes that you see all the time that everyone else has explored so much. We want to explore something different. So that's our take.
Beautiful. Rod, I also love to move into a discussion on economic sustainability. It wouldn't be a conversation about blockchain gaming without that conversation also coming up as well. A lot of what's happening out there at the moment is there is instability in these economies, because it essentially is Ponzinomics, right? You're having to make sure that the inflow of new players coming in can outweigh the supply that's coming out of your economy, and that model has shown to not be so successful. And sort of seeing the trends out there from other games at the moment, are there deliberate things that you guys are trying to do in the economic design of Moonray to help support that sustainability? For example, some of the suggestions that people are putting out there is that, well, you actually have to be very good at limiting your ROI upfront, because the moment you promise these big returns, then that's going to start to drive your economy down a death spiral. That's one suggestion that people have. The other thing that people talk about as well is that you have to actually just create a fun game that people would want to invest into, and that essentially becomes the sink for the token or whatever else it might be. And I wanted to get a sense from you guys, how do you think about that element, or does it not really matter in the sense of you guys are primarily NFT driven to start and the entire ecosystem revolves around that?
No, I definitely think it's the second option you gave, where it's gameplay first. So there has to be a reason for people to come to the game, and it can't be APY staking, essentially, because number one, you're not attracting gamers with that. I don't know, that's not a gamer. That's not a fun thing to do. And then of course, that's really hard to sustain. Like, how are you gonna, where's money coming into the ecosystem from? Like, who's actually buying in? Well, no one is. If everyone's there just to pull money out, then, someone's got to put money in at some point, that's why these, a lot of these projects are unsustainable. A lot of it's focused way too much on tokens. And that's why we look at them as DeFi projects. I think very few of the games that are around now are actually games, in my opinion. I think if your game cannot survive as a Web2 game, then it's not going to survive as a blockchain game. And I don't see that you can make a distinction between them. The game has to be fun, and it can't be based around earning tokens. So I think that, the first things first is, like, games should wait way longer to release a token, if at all. You have to really show that there's a need for the token. There's no point in having a token just to have a token. And so I think that you can be very much NFT based, and that's the approach that we're taking for a while. I do think, however, that a token can add a lot of value, and there's interesting things you can do with it once you have a big base of active users, of gamers actually playing the game. And then you can release a token that makes sense. But releasing a token before there's gameplay, is suicide, I think.
I'm curious on, as you talk about play-to-earn economies as well, talk to us about your read on the current market conditions today. I mean, running a project nowadays must be hard as well, especially with the projected longer-term instability, macro, but also in crypto as well. For you then, even in internal comms for your team, like what's the story that you're telling in terms of strategy and what the focus is?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not pretty right now, but it also wasn't entirely unpredictable. I mean, everyone has seen a recession's on the way. It's just a question of when and how deep is it going to be, but we all knew it was going to happen at some point. Yeah, the general world picture is a little bit bleak. But I also think that this is when, the best business models are made, and a lot of people say that, the best companies come out of bear markets, and that's probably true, because this is where, there's no more BS. You can't BS your way through an environment like this. You have to really attract your customers. You have to really give them value, because they're watching every dollar they spend, and they're not going to spend money on nonsense. So whatever you offer has to be real value. So it's also a good way of, I guess, exploring the right business model without, I guess, like fake data coming in, because in a bull market, if everything you do is successful, you're like, oh, we figured it out. We know what the business model should be. And it's like, no, that's a business model that works in a bull market, but it's not going to last 5 or 10 years. So, it's difficult, but it is also an opportunity to find the right way to make a sustainable company and a sustainable game. On our end, we saw it coming, and we made sure that we raised money to be able to last through a downturn. So we're just going to batten down the hatches and deliver a game.
And do you think like the allocation of capital in terms of how aggressively you deploy that capital changes as a result of market conditions? For example, I imagine during the bull market, was it kind of like, let's try and get a game out as quickly as possible because the market conditions are right. And now actually you guys are willing to extend out that roadmap and maybe go more into, let's be really careful how we deploy each dollar into core strategic areas. Yeah, I'd love to kind of hear about whether your capital allocation strategy has changed due to the current.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some of that. And it just, the focus shifts a little bit from like, we need to get a game out there just because everyone else is doing it. And then everyone else is launching this, that, the other. But it's more like, okay, we need to get a product out there as soon as we can that gamers will like, because like we're going to need to bring in revenue. But that means that whatever we put out there, it has to be real, it has to be good, it has to attract gamers in a tough environment. So what can we make that's good enough to get someone to give us some of their hard-earned dollars, in an environment like this? So it becomes much more of a focus on bootstrapping revenue. We do have to get lean and mean, but I think that's good. I mean, I guess in the middle of a bull market, everyone tries to grow as fast as possible. And to a degree, you have to, but then there's a point at which it's like, you got to be at the right size for what your business is going to be for the next year or year and a half. And then it's like, once we get to the next stage and we have this many users and we see that, we can start scaling into this, scaling to that, then we're going to add more, more team members here, team members there. So you do become a lot more judicious. Whereas in the middle of a bull market, you might say, listen, there's a war for talent. We got to hire anyone that we, get our hands on, because we're going to need them sooner or later. And we can just go out and raise more money. Now it's like, okay, when we need them, then we're going to go find the people that we need. But right now we don't. So let's wait 6 months. Let's be a little more careful. But it's healthier. I mean, definitely the last 6 months were just a little bit insane, in the industry, and you know it when you're in it. But it's like, every day that it doesn't pop, you're like, oh well, maybe I don't know, maybe it's just going to keep going for a while. We'll just enjoy it as long as it lasts.
What's the also, when you project forward as well, at some point, you go through a bear market, and on a cycle basis, more and more people join the ecosystem. We saw that in 2014, 2017, here's another one. I mean, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. And so from your perspective then, Web3 gaming mass market, how long is that going to take us, do you think?
I mean, we were thinking that regardless, it was going to take at least 2 years before mainstream gamers start paying attention. And we think that just because that's what's going to take for the technology to mature to the point where we can make the blockchain become mostly invisible, or invisible enough to make it attractive to Web2 gamers. So I mean, I think 2 years, regardless of the market condition, is what it's going to take for mainstream gamers to start to notice blockchain games, for the games to mature, for enough games to go through the cycle of development where they're good enough to compete with a console title or with a top PC title. That's takes a while. It just takes time. And then on top of it now, we probably have a bear market that's going to last, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years, and we'll see how long it goes for. So then it's sort of like, if you can position yourself correctly and just say, all right, we're just going to focus on product. I mean, just entirely focus on product and organic user growth. Then when the next bull market comes, we should be, in theory, well positioned. We should have a solid product. We should understand, who our customers are, and sort of what they want, and hit the afterburners in 2 years, 3 years, something like that.
What do you think are the actual, and across Web3 gaming then? I mean, Axie was really the pioneer for the space as really setting the standards. As you look across beyond just Moonray, can't say Moonray, what are the other Web3 games that you respect?
I mean, there definitely are a few out there that we think that we think have the right idea and that are going in the right direction. I think Godzilla, what those guys are doing is probably the best one that we've seen. I think Big Time's got good ideas. I think there's a few others that understand, that are really focusing on gameplay, and they're approaching it first as a game and then adding economic elements where they make sense. The ones that we think are going to struggle a little more, the ones that are too DeFi focused, the too Web3, like When Moon kind of crowd, and that's going to be tough. This I think that's over.
You have Moon in your name, bro. You can't say that.
I know, but I mean, it was fun while it lasted, I suppose, but it's going to be the companies that are focused on delivering a game, and making fun gameplay, and then figuring out how to unlock the economics. I mean, basically, if you build a community, then you'll figure out the economics eventually. The community comes first.
Well, what's the best way for a game studio to grow? From what we've seen, there's in my framework, there's really 2 points of growth. It's either you take the traditional game studio model, which is you go game by game by game, every 2-3 years build something new for the community to be a part of. Secondly, it's you start with the game and then you go layer one, you go infrastructure, you go your immutables, your Axies. And so from that perspective, then how are you thinking about actually what is the right way, and then how are you trying to play this ecosystem?
I like to think of it more as like a living game, so it's not like there's going to be a version 2, version 3, but it's like the same game. Like, Moonray 5 years from now may look and play very differently, but I think it'll just kind of happen naturally over time, organically. So you're constantly like recycling good ideas, into something better, hopefully. And any ideas that didn't work, you just, eject them. That's just kind of like the way. So it's more of like the way that like, Web2 platforms grow or something like that. There's no like version 1.0, version 2.0 of a social media company or anything like that, but they change dramatically over 5 years. And that's what I think, games should do. But also depends on the kind of game. Like in a multiplayer game, I think that makes sense. If it's a single player game, more episodic content makes a lot of sense, and then releasing version 1, version 2, version 3 does make sense. Or maybe you release it in chapters, and like, everything's like chapter based. It takes a long time to get through it all. But for a multiplayer game like ours, we think of it as like a, like people have asked us, well, when are you going to be in full release? It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, like, I don't even think about that as a concept. It's like, we're going to put it out to just constantly change it and grow. So it's never going to be released, I suppose, but it's going to be out there, like everyone's going to be able to play it. And it's never finished.
The campaign's never done. That reminds me of, I think best in class, almost games today are, it's more than just gaming. This is cultural IP. This reminds me of Marvel when you said episodic, because what happens is you have core comic book content, you take them through the movies, you spin out each characters into their own set, different movies, TV shows, you name it, other stuff. That seems like the best way to almost keep IP iterative and ever changing.
Yeah, and you reach new people that way as well, and some people may, enter your game from one direction or from another direction, or maybe not enter it all the way. Some people maybe, I think that it's going to become more like a, like a multimedia type of IP that you have to create, where it's like, There's a game part to it. There is like, we're doing a comic book. You can have NFTs that are just straight up like, PFPs, let's say, or just like, like just regular NFTs for collectors that you can play the game if you want, but you don't have to play the game because it can still be a collectible, because it's based on comic book content. So then you just have like different buckets for different types of people to come in and interact with the world. And if your world is rich enough, then you can support that, and that's kind of how if you have a rich world, if you can have different entry points into the same IP that different types of people find interesting. So gamers find it interesting, comic book collectors find it interesting, the NFT crowd finds it interesting. Then it's like okay, now you've got something that's that's cool and that people like.
I think that is what's going to really take that is what captures imagination as well. It's like when you're able to deliver those type of experiences across all those different avenues. As you look towards the future as well, Rod, what's you've just started this campaign, I'll call it. As you look forward, 5-10 years, what's going to make you the most proud in terms of building what you're building today? Like what are you going to be most proud of?
We do want to make overall, like the game that we're making now, I expect it to disappear in 3 to 5 years, and there'll be another game that is like I said, it recycles. Like you don't even notice it changing over time, but 5 years from now I think it's going to look very different, may play very different, and it may feel like a very different game even though you see the same core ideas. But more than anything, we do want to just create a world that's fun to explore and fun to spend time in, and that we can have different ways of people spending time in that world. And some of it is going to be PvP combat, and that PvP combat may change over time, with as we improve how we build it and as like tastes change. But some of the way that people spend time in the world may be more of the story-driven open world exploration. It may be in other media like comic books, like other things we can do where we can get the same ideas across. Because really we just kind of, a lot of this is based on just being a little bit bored with conventional sci-fi. That I just think everyone's kind of doing the same stuff over and over and over. And with the technology that we have now, with like game engine technology and just the kind of graphics you can put out in general, it's like I just don't want to see any more like I just don't want to see robots. It's like I know what robots look like. So you make something new. Make something different. And I think it's possible. And that's kind of what we really want to do. Is just like create just a really weird world that we can explore in different ways. 5 years from now, we should still be exploring it, but maybe in different avenues.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Settlers, Rod. We're incredibly excited by the ecosystem that you're building at Moonray. For all of our listeners, make sure to check out Moonray on Twitter. They're doing incredible things. Rod, I want to thank you again for joining us, mate.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. We'll be in touch.
Thanks so much, Rod.